Hello, and thanks for tuning in. In a 2022 Washington Post opinion article, author Ebony McGee wrote about the difficulty that students of color have finding a sense of belonging in STEM fields, that's science, technology, engineering, and math. As an associate professor at Vanderbilt University, she has documented the details of those kinds of challenges. I will explore those challenges over several interviews, but in this one, I'm laying the groundwork for exploration by chatting with my friend William Clyburn. He is a materials engineering graduate of Georgia Tech, my older son's alma mater. He is also from my generation. By looking back on his career, we can paint some of the broad brushstrokes on what can help the current generation of STEM students succeed. I hope you join us.
William Clyburn. I'm here in Washington, D.C. I have my own consulting firm. We do business development and government relations. I am an engineer, a materials engineer from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Arnold, I think your family knows something about Georgia Tech.
Yes.
As my engineering friends like to tease me, I used to have an honorable profession before I became a lawyer. My lawyer friends don't like that joke so much, but it's very intriguing on how I got to law and the focus that engineering has played in my life, and why I try to do STEM classes and presentations to try to encourage other people and to encourage their children to look at STEM and science and technology classes and engineering backgrounds and mathematics.
Mm-hmm. So, you've been in the STEM field for a while. I mean, you've met a lot of engineers. As you said, you said a materials engineer, materials engineering.
Yeah. So the degree is actually in ceramic engineering, and what is that? Is that pottery, a tidy bowl? No, it's superconductors and semiconductors and nuclear waste glass. So yeah, that is my background.
Wow, that's awesome. And from what I understand, not all students specialize in an engineering field. So how did it come to be that someone encouraged you to specialize? How did you make that decision as opposed to getting just like a general education degree, general engineering degree?
Yeah, so and Georgia Tech is pretty much set up that way where I started off as chemical engineering, and so you had to take a different chemistry regime than those that didn't need to do that.
Okay.
And so if you were interested in electrical engineering, you had a certain suite of classes you would take. If you were interested in architecture or industrial engineering, you didn't have to take all that chemistry.
Okay.
So once you want to try to figure out where your interests were, and I was always interested in chemistry.
Okay.
And in chemistry is something that my mother used to teach.
Okay.
And so I was always fascinated by chemistry. And my father was a football coach, but he also had a background in health.
Okay.
So he would always talk to me about science. And I fortunately grew up in an area, even though it wasn't New York City, wasn't Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. It was a small southern town, but we lived close to Savannah Riverside.
Okay.
So that used to be a DuPont facility, a Department of Energy facility. And so they actually had engineering programs for minority students.
Okay.
The Summer Technical Enrichment Program called STEP, or the Aiken Technical Opportunity for Minority Students called ADAMS. And so I was introduced to a very concentrated engineering program in 7th and 8th grade, and it was just fascinating to me. And one thing led to the other, where I wasn't sure what I wanted to major in, but I knew if I majored in engineering, I could be an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor, or anything else because of what you learned and how you learned how to think.
Right. When you look back on those programs that you participated in, to what extent would you say they, encouraged you to stay on that path? Because what I want to do is to get parents thinking about, exposure, like what kinds of programs they should be looking at. For example, NSBE. I know NSBE has a program for young students to get into engineering. And both of my
The
sons.
National Science Association for Black Engineers. Okay.
Thank you.
National
Thank you for
Society
saying.
for Black Engineers. Yes.
Yes. So I know they have a program for young students. So what it sounds like what you were in is similar to what they were in. But what should parents be looking for when it comes to trying to decide what kind of programs to have their children in?
Oh, great question. The first thing that comes to mind is for parents to think outside the box.
Okay.
My parents were school teachers in a small town, but because they got to college and were the first ones to go to college, and so it's a different dynamic in 1950s and 60s South Carolina. For African American women and men. And so they thought outside the box. They knew that they wanted their children to do more than what they did. And so there were new endeavors, new opportunities, new positions and occupations that didn't really exist before, didn't even exist for them, didn't exist at all. And so they thought about science and technology and engineering, and they would have conversations with me about being an ophthalmologist. I didn't know what an ophthalmologist was. Is that the eye doctor? That's eye surgeon. Okay. They wanted me to look into math and science, and so they put that seed in me. And so when an opportunity presented itself, and they pushed for, well, if this company is here doing business, they ought to invest in young people, including young Black people. And so that's how the engineering programs for minority students got started, was initiated. And it just really piqued our interest about a whole new world, about how do things work? Why does gravity work that way? Why is acceleration 9.8 meters per second square? Why does your parents say, don't leave the can in the refrigerator unopened because it will rust, and you don't want to drink or eat anything that's rusty. That's not good for you. Well, what makes it oxidize? Why do they say that? And so you start to ask questions about why the world works the way it does, and how can you make it work even better? And so when you think about that, and they let you know that, Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb by himself. There was somebody else. That light bulb wouldn't have been working if Lewis Latimer hadn't come up with the filament. Oh, you mean somebody Black has something to do with that? And so when you learn that history and you say, well, I can do that. And so you start to see things that you didn't see before. And I've told parents this, and just like sometimes things are hidden in plain sight.
Okay.
And so if you actually plant the seed, and then you have organizations like NSBE, and you have organizations and companies that are trying to do better with diversity and equity and inclusion, then you tap into that, and then you let your child go. But you planted the seed. And once you plant that seed, it's like a mustard seed. It can just grow really big. And that's what happened to me. They planted the seed. I went into the program, was thirsty for more knowledge. And that's how I ended up at Georgia Tech.
So this is great. Now, you had the great benefit of your mom, like you said, being a chemistry teacher. And I think you said, I forgot what you said your dad did.
Yes. So he was a tough football coach.
Okay.
But he also had a health background.
Okay.
And so even if they didn't have expertise in any particular area, and if for those parents that aren't chemistry teachers, or
that's what I
aren't
wanted to get to.
football coaches, or aren't engineers, you know some, and you build out your network so that you get to know some, and that's part of the how we reach one, teach one, and that's why those nonprofits and those organizations like NSBE are so important, because we want. I know you did a podcast and you had people talking about high achievers, and that's what we want. We want high achievers. We want to sustain those high achievers and support them. But we also want to look for people who may not be considered high achievers, not because they can't do it, but because they have not had the exposure.
Exactly.
And once they get that exposure, then you turn them loose. And so we really are looking at two fronts: to support those who we know are high achievers, and to look for those that don't show up on the radar screen.
Right.
And then even one of my favorite stories, and you'll hear other people talk about Ron Mcnair. Who was Ron Mcnair? He was an astronaut. He was a Black astronaut from Lake City, South Carolina. You won't find it on the map. But he ended up getting his PhD from MIT. You know where MIT is. You from up in that area. And so everybody knows about the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But how did he get to MIT? And he ended up being an astronaut. He was on the ill-fated 1986 Challenger shuttle. He was heading back to South Carolina to be a professor. But before he got to MIT, he first went to North Carolina A&T, which is known for producing more engineers than most other universities. And so that's where he learned. He was always smart, but coming from a small town in South Carolina, he didn't have all of the foundations. And North Carolina A&T and those professors saw what he needed, gave him what he needed, and then they let him go. And the next thing you know, he's world-renowned astronaut. And so that whole story about plant the seed, that'll be the theme for the day, planting the seed. And once you plant the seed, you water it a little bit, you make sure things are going along well, put a little fence around it, support it, and watch how it grows. And it takes off on its own. And that's what happened to me. And that's why you're doing this podcast. And that's why we volunteer to go and talk to parents, go and talk to schools that don't get a lot of attention or don't have a lot of resources. Because once that light turns on, and they know that they can do it, and they see you and they see me, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I really like that. Mentioning the idea of, the light being turned on. That's something I think about a lot, like what it takes for a student to go from not being sure about their own abilities, not being sure about the path they want to be on, or not being sure about how much to apply themselves in order to achieve in whatever realm that is, to having that light turned on. I'm just really interested in that moment and how that happens. If you look back, can you think of when that moment was for you?
I don't know that it was one single moment. And that's a blessing. It wasn't just one moment of an epiphany. It was having dinner with the family and hearing my parents' conversation. It was when they were talking about what my grandfather did before I was born. They were talking about, my father was talking about his father, who was a World War I veteran. And then, but then you hear stories about they fought for the country, but when they came back over here, they were treated like second-class citizens. But they knew that education was an equalizer. But and to see how my father leapfrogged one of 15 kids.
Wow.
And he leapfrogged to build the life and the foundation. And then I leapfrogged, and his other children leapfrogged from what he was doing because of the foundation that he and my mother laid, from the stories that they would tell that let us know that, oh, this is not the end for us. This is just the beginning. And you can do anything anybody else can do. But they showed us stories about how they overcame a lot of oppression and a lot of roadblocks and obstructions, and that they expect for us to do more, to do better. And they expect for us to remember those that may not be on the accelerated path. Not because they're not deserving, not because they don't have the skill set, but maybe they didn't have the resources. So you make sure that they have the resources. And so that's why we're sitting here now, because we're trying to make sure that we're looking to make sure other people have resources so they can join us.
Yes, exactly.
Not just for joining us just to be happy, but because the whole world does better. Companies make more money. The country does better when you are inclusive and you find these precious nuggets that were being overlooked, hidden in plain sight. And when we find them and we say, now you can do this, here's a little something to help you. Now you go and then watch all the stories You can
Right.
have podcasts forever about the success stories because of nuggets that you found, and because you saw something that was hidden in plain sight, and you let everybody know that it's right here. He's right there. She's right there. And
Right.
that's what excites me about STEM, conversations about STEM, and conversations about what can we do to let parents know that it's out there. You can be from Southeast DC, you can be from Aiken, South Carolina, or you can be from one of the wealthiest parts of the country. But once you see that this is achievable, and all we need to do is to make sure we don't forget those that are hidden in plain sight. Wow, it's just amazing about the potential that's there.
That's great. So there are a few things in what you just said that I want to circle back to, and one is the idea of being discovered. The idea of somebody who has been exposed to great information, seeing somebody else and reaching out to them and encouraging them. So you raised it with Ron McNair, being in North Carolina A&T. This idea that someone saw something in him and encouraged it. So you were mentioning this theme of planting the seed, but yeah, I like that. I like this. I like that theme. Thinking about how people can reach out to someone else to encourage them, to see where a path that they could be on, and and to embrace that, and encourage that person to do that. So that's one thing for sure. The other thing is this idea of the storytelling. So one of the previous things that I wrote about was this idea of intergenerational momentum. And I have this belief that sometimes we may not even realize it, but we may be fulfilling the aspirations of previous generations in the things that we're doing. And things that we find interesting, we may not even really know why they're interesting, but it could be that we picked up on something. And maybe one way of picking up on something are the stories that our parents are telling us about previous generations. So that's really fascinating, for you to speak to that. And the other thing too is, when we were talking earlier about one's parents not being chemistry teachers or football coaches, one thing that I'm sure everybody has stories, right? Because we all have experiences. And so the idea of sharing stories and then adding to that, expectations for greater achievement, and again, I'm, in our conversation, you've spoken to it, and I think it's important for us to be open-minded about, what we could be meaning when we say achievement. I say high achievement in the opening, and in, other conversations, but high to me doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's high is the same high, right? That, what I mean is that whatever level somebody is on, that they push for the greatest that they could do, so high for them, and hopefully, that level that person is on is sufficient for them to be able to also achieve their other greater goals. So, but that said, let me kick it back to you to ask you about what you're now seeing. So, we've talked about the expectations that were given to you. We've talked about the ways in which people, the fact that your parents planted a seed. I'm interested again, sort of get your perspective on, you're both an attorney and an engineer. You have colleagues who are engineers. We've talked a little bit about the current state, the current labor market, but your thoughts about what students can be doing now to prepare themselves for careers in STEM, going forward.
Yeah, if you look at the labor market, and you're starting to see where millions of jobs are going to come online that have to do with technology, with science, with the environment. How do we mitigate carbon What about carbon sequestration? How do we make the environment cleaner when the regulations and the technology have not caught up? But what about some of the natural mitigating regimes and mechanisms that are in there? How do we put all that together? So science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and we're talking about the economy, we're talking about inflation, how does money work? What about SPACs and investments? So we have with Robinhood, you have people who weren't interested in investments. They're like, oh, this is interesting, it's digitized. So that's going, now I need to learn more about calls and puts and options. And well, instead of my buying the new pair of jeans, let me put that $30 over to the side because I want to invest a fractional share. So all of this is STEM related, and it just opens up the world and younger generations and parents. One of the beautiful things about your podcast, when you push this out, if I don't know about investments, if I don't know about engineering, and I hear about that, I'm like, I'm gonna call, who's this guy, this key guy? Call that organization and say, I need to meet an engineer. I need an engineer to come talk to my child. I need an engineer to come talk to this classroom so that we can learn more about it. They got a PTA meeting. Bring one of your scientists over so you can tell us about what's coming down the pipeline. So that would intrigue my child, and then he's gonna do his study and she's gonna do her homework. And now I'm going to open up a whole new world. I don't have to know it all. You know, I go and I go to the airport and fly, and you know, the plane is late or if it's canceled or delayed. You go into the little newsstand and you see the little books for $3.99 or $4.99. It might be a John Maxwell book. One of them is How Successful People Think. And in that book, he talks about you need to think big. Don't just go with what's in front of you. Think broader. And successful people think big. And so I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to have all the connections. But through your organization and through people that you know, and because of your desire to want to share that with other people, a parent can tap into that and then help plant that seed for their child. Because you can look at labor statistics, and you can look at CNN or CNBC or Fox News. You can look at any of the news outlets and you can see where the dynamics are going in terms of the future and jobs. And many of them are going to be engineering, science, technology, mathematics based. And because of that, we want our children and our children's children to be prepared for that. And we want them to participate in that because they could be the ones that help to make something that much more efficient or that much better. And the next thing you know, their company is on the New York Stock Exchange. And that's an exciting potentiality that is open to any of us, because some of the big people, they come from small places. And so that gives people from all walks of life encouragement that my child can do that too.
Oh, that's awesome. So this has been great. I just have one more question for you. All right, so I like science fiction, and I've mentioned this before, and this is something I'm asking all of the people who have come on, and it's really a way of reflecting, which you've done a lot of already, but I want you to imagine that you could go back in time anonymously and talk to your parents, to counsel them. You know, you've gained this experience, you know how you turned out, and you've gained experience about, you know, what the world is like. And so now you have this opportunity to go back in time, you're in, you know, the time machine, and counsel your parents to encourage you to do something in particular that would help you even more. All right. So the question is, what age would you pick? You know, around what age would you pick? And what would you encourage your parents to do?
Wow. Well, now that sounds like something out of Avengers Endgame.
Right, that is what they did.
Oh, wow. And just to be able to see my parents trying to teach me where to go and what to do. One of the things, the first thing that comes to mind is that I used to read a lot, but I didn't read fiction.
Okay.
I didn't read Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew or whatever they had back then.
Right.
Now, I did like Dr. Seuss. I did like Cat in the Hat. But I would read a lot about hurricanes and tornadoes and natural disasters, and probably was a weird kid. And my parents wanted me to broaden out and read all types of literature, which I think is a great idea.
Okay.
And it's hard to figure it out, but sometimes maybe you just let the child do where he has a natural inclination to go. I might have just been a geek. I might have been a weatherman. I don't know.
Okay.
But I think what my parents did, it wasn't much more that I could tell them, because they tried to steer me in a particular direction, but they didn't press me too hard.
Okay.
So maybe because they were teachers, maybe because I was doing things that they didn't have an opportunity to do. So I think if I were to go back in time and have a conversation with them, but I'm anonymous,
right,
they don't know that I'm the child,
right,
just like Endgame,
right.
I think I would end up doing the same thing that Iron Man did to his father, just to encourage him and saying that you're going to do well, and your child is going to love you just because you spend time with him.
Wow.
And I think that would be a very similar story for me in my time travel.
Awesome. Well, William, thank you so much. This has been great. You shed a lot, and what I really like about the way you shared it too is, I mean, this is just you. You know, we've had a chance to chat offline, you know, not on camera, and the person that I'm seeing now is the person that I've known all this time. So I appreciate you being yourself and giving parents a lot to think about. So so I'll just wish you goodbye, and hope that you have a great day and continue to do what you're doing.
Very good. Thank you, my friend.
All right now. All right, take care. Bye-bye. I'm so grateful to William for sharing his insight and his experiences. We've talked many times over the years, but this is the first time I've taped it so that I could share his insight with you. Well, today, he touched on the importance of early exposure through STEM programs, the role parents can play in coaching students to become interested in science, and how the broader community can inspire students by picking them out and encouraging their interests. Well, if you had any takeaways regarding what can help STEM students succeed, feel free to leave a comment. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the interview and will consider subscribing. With your support, you will provide even more momentum as I chase after the answers to questions concerning high achievement. Thank you.